This video is brought to you by the ASRock Steel Legend Z490. If you've settled on Z490, you want the 10600K and on up, the fastest gaming processor you can get right now, you know, this motherboard would be a good fit for that. We got Dr. Moth's VRM. It's going to support the 6-core or even the 10-core, the 10850K or the 10900K. The 10850K I think is the best deal if you want 10 cores, or the 10600K if you just want the raw fastest gaming performance in the ASRock Z490 Steel Legend motherboard. Good news! There's a special at Newegg right now. ASRock and Newegg have teamed up. You can get a discount on your motherboard. Be sure to click the link in the description and check out the awesome combo that is being offered by ASRock and Newegg for this particular motherboard. We've got Nahimic audio. We've got an X16 reinforced PCIe expansion slot. We've got another X16 physical expansion slot. This is a great motherboard to pair with something like the i5 10600K for an affordable, because this is a sub $200 Z490 motherboard, gaming build that is the fastest gaming build that you can build right now. Thanks, ASRock.
Hey gang, we're here to talk about VPNs. Now, if you're questioning, do I need a VPN? Have you ever seen another video on this channel? If not, please pause this video and go and watch every video in the backlog, and then come back here. And if you don't have a sense of existential dread or that someone is actively watching you right now, watch them again until you do. Because that is the case. You're being spied upon every day by your government and evil corporations and who knows who else. You do need a VPN. The only question then becomes, who do I use as a VPN? Now in the past, we've had some really good recommendations about that kind of thing. Unfortunately, VPNs lately have been following some negative trends. So you've got the really bad things like Onavo, the Facebook VPN. Now of course you know better than to use that, but some people don't. The Facebook VPN, yeah, it would hide your identity from some external websites that you visited, but Facebook would then harvest everything. So that's not good. But what about no logging VPNs, right? VPNs like private internet access in the past have had these no logging policies, and they've had court cases. And it's like, yeah, they've proven in court they don't keep logs. That's really great, right? But then you find out that somebody bought private internet access. And are they still doing that? Can we be sure? So you have these acquisitions, and the VPNs that get acquired are often the most popular ones. The ones that people really trust. They throw money at them, they buy them, and then can we trust them after that? That's the problem. So we are left with, we have to mention the no-log VPNs in China. Turned out they had a bunch of logs, and they had a data breach. Actually, they didn't put a password on one of their databases. So, who can you trust? The answer is nobody. You can trust no one in this world except for yourself. Not always yourself, but mostly yourself. And if not yourself, then who? So what we're going to talk about today is your own VPN. Cloud hosting and Wireguard to establish your very own VPN that you control. You can turn off the logs, you can do whatever you want. Now, we're gonna use Linode, because we love Linode, and we're gonna use Wireguard. There are some other options. Wireguard is one of the more basic ones, and it's kind of in their mission statement that they're not trying to do a lot with it. What they wanna do is they wanna give you encrypted UDP tunnel between you and your cloud hosting to create a VPN that you control. And that's what we're gonna do. Now it's important to note what a VPN will do and what a VPN won't do in terms of protecting you. Now, Linode, if they get a warrant brought to them, they have to give up your information. So yeah, if you're gonna try to do illegal things through your own VPN, don't think that that's gonna work. A subpoena, a warrant, they're gonna be able to attach your IP, your billing details to that external IP. So get that out of your mind if you wanna do illegal stuff. This is more to protect you from data collection and, you know, things spying on you outside of the legal system. The other thing you have to keep in mind is you can poison this well very easily. If you log into a banking website or Gmail or something like, or Facebook through your VPN, guess what? Your new IP address is going to be propagated among your advertising profile. They will immediately know who you are after that. So you have to be careful to keep your safe browsing and your reckless browsing on different identities. So just keep that in mind. This is not a silver bullet, but it is an effective bullet. It's got some armor piercing, it's got some frangibility, but won't kill a werewolf.
The first thing we're going to do is set up our host. To do this, we're going to use Linode. You don't have to use Linode. Any sort of cloud hosting will work for this. You can even do this on your own server if you have a external IP address for it. I am going to use Ubuntu for this. Ubuntu, not sure exactly how you pronounce it. I will warn you, so when I was experimenting with this on my local network, just to get it working, I used Debian. And with that version of Debian, Wireguard was backported. The install process was much more unpleasant. I did get it working, so you could use any distro for this that you want, but if you have the option, maybe stay away from Debian. So I'm kind of going to go cheap on this. This is not something that is going to be doing anything other than running Wireguard. It should not have very much, it should not be taxed by what we're doing here. So I'm going to go for the 2 GB plan. And yeah, I'll just keep that normal. I'm not going to leave this up. So in this tutorial, I will be showing you my private keys. I'll be showing you some IP addresses. Don't assume that those are still there. Don't try to attack them, please, because I'm going to tear this down as soon as this is done. All right, and then we'll just click. If you're following along with Linode, which we recommend, we love Linode. Just set all this up, choose your own region. And if you wanted to use SSH keys, obviously this is not a long-term thing. I'm not going to bother with that, but this would be a more secure way of accessing your VPN. And then we will create. And there it is. Ready to go. Again, I'm going to show you this IP address. Normally you wouldn't want people to know this under any circumstance, but going to tear this down as soon as I'm done. So please don't try to attack random other Linode users trying to get to my VPN. Once our Linode instance is up and running, and you will get an output that will let you know that it's booting, and then when it's booting, and so when everything is done, it's ready to go, then you want to head on over to SSH. I'm going to connect to your box. Now the defaults, the username will be root because that's the only account that exists right now. And the password will be the password that you set during the creation process. And here we are. We're logged in. Get some information about your system there, and we're ready to go. So step 1, we want to go ahead and install Wireguard. To install Wireguard, the first thing we're going to do is add the repository for it. Now your distribution might already have this, but it doesn't hurt to run this command again. This will just ensure that we have the package manager information with which to install Wireguard. You press enter, tell it that it's okay. It's going to download some stuff. And then once that is complete, we apt install Wireguard. Of course, if you're using a different distribution, you might have a different package manager command, but it will always be called Wireguard. We do want to continue. It's going to take a whopping 344 kilobytes of disk space. We can afford that. And there we go. So we should be able to go to etc. Wireguard. Again, if you are not a root user, you will not have permission to this. Use the sudo command. And here we are. It's empty, but that's expected. So we now have a installation of Wireguard set up. Our next step will be to generate some keys. encryption keys for our WireGuard setup. We can create our keys with a single command. I'm going to put them here in the WireGuard directory. Now, it doesn't really matter where you put your keys. You can put your keys directly in your configuration file, or you can reference a file to use your keys in the configuration. It's probably a little bit more secure. I'm just going to put them directly in the configuration file here, so I just need to see their contents. I'm going to put them in the WireGuard folder. Again, you don't have to do that, but you do have to make sure that you have permission to write wherever you run this command. This will pipe the commands together to create both keys at the same time. You could do it individually as well if you want. And once we run that, we now have 2 key files, and the contents of those will be our public and private keys. Now, I'm going to show you my private key in this video, but keep in mind, you never want to do that in the real world. And again, I won't be using this installation because once I show you my private key, it's no good. I'm going to tear it down as soon as this video is done. There's more than one way to set up WireGuard, and if you go to the WireGuard official site, you'll actually see a command by command way of doing this. That is very inefficient. That's not how we will be doing it. We're going to use a configuration file, and the configuration file with the WireGuard quick command will give us the ability to just put all of the commands that we want to set up our interface in a file and call it to do them all at once rather than typing them in individually. We will talk about that file and we'll go through it line by line to sort of show you what's going on. But before we do that, there's 2 things that we need to know. We need to know the name of our network interface and our external IP address. Again, I'm going to show you the external IP address. Normally you don't want people to know this just because, you know, the world is a terrible place and people will do horrible things if they can try to connect to you. I will say I'm going to pull this down. I know I'm saying it a lot, but please don't attack this IP address. It will no longer be me once you see this video. So IP space A will give us that information. This is going to pull up all of the network interfaces on this machine. There's only the one we need to worry about. So the name of that is ETH0. That's pretty standard, but don't count on yours being this. Double check and make sure. So you need to record this value, and then this will be our IP address. I'm just going to do IPv4 in this video, but you can see the IPv6 is down here if you want to go that route. So now we know this is our external IP address and our network name. So now that we have those values, record those values somewhere and we will start working on the configuration file. So now we are going to set up our WireGuard configuration file, our server configuration. I've already done this, but we'll step through it line by line. You can call this whatever you want, but WG0 is the standard, and then the .conf. You can run as many of these as you want as well. You might want more than one WireGuard setup here, so you know you could do WG1, WG2. Call it whatever you want, but the file name needs to match the name of the WireGuard interface that you eventually create. And in this case, because we're going to use the quick command, whatever we feed the quick command, it will look for that file. So we'll use WG0, the default. Now the first line of this file is interface in brackets. That just tells it that this is the server interface, because later on we'll add some peer configurations. And this address line is very important. This is the address that you want the WireGuard instance to run on. Now notice this is an internal network address. You want to use something from the internal network range, because this is not a real address. This is something we're creating for this WireGuard instance to live on. This is what you will access it with once you set up your tunnel. Let's go with good old 69. This is IPv4. You can also use IPv6 here if you want. I'm just going to go with 4. Save config equal true. What this does is if we modify the WireGuard configuration of WG0 via the command line, then it will automatically update this file to reflect that, as long as we have save config in here. So that makes it more convenient. If you, let's say you add a peer via the command line, then it'll go ahead and add the peer in this configuration file, which is convenient. And here's the meet up, so the post up and post down commands. What's going to happen here when we use the quick setup is once it establishes WG0, it is going to run the post up commands. And then when WG0 is destroyed, it's going to run the post down commands. So we have IP table commands in here. And so basically what we're doing, we're adding a command here for incoming traffic to be accepted. And then we're adding this routing command for ETH0. Now this is what you would replace with the name of your network interface when you ran IP space A. If yours was something different, just make sure you remember to swap this out or it will never work. And then finally, we're going to add outgoing as well. So the first line is incoming, the last line is outgoing, and then in the middle here we have which network interface to use for the forwards. If you are going to use this as a VPN, it's critical that you run this outgoing line here. If you just want to, for example, create a tunnel that you're going to SSH into to use this machine, then you don't necessarily need the outgoing line. But since we're doing a VPN, we want all the other traffic coming back to be able to get through and come back to us, like our web traffic, for example. And then post down is just the polar opposite of that. So again, we have incoming and outgoing, and we have the route to the interface, but in this case we are -D, we are destroying those. So when Wireguard comes down, we don't want our IP tables to be open anymore, so we tear that down every time that Wireguard comes down with the quick down command. The port is whatever you want it to be. This is the standard one for Wireguard, but your client needs to know what port to connect to, and we need to know what to open up on the firewall, so we'll go with the standard. And then the private key that we just generated. Again, you could reference the file here if you want to be a little bit more secure. I'm just going to copy paste this in. And once again, don't ever show this to anybody. So once we have this file created, we can go ahead and start up our WG0. One quick thing we're going to do to increase the security of this is to set up the uncomplicated firewall. Now we're using the IP tables for our configuration file, but this, now if you're going to use this system for other things, there's going to be more steps to this. You might need more ports, but because this is purely just for a VPN, we want to go ahead and allow 22 because that's our SSH connection. If we don't have this on a remote host, we're in trouble. And we're also going to add the Wireguard port. Now this is the port that you defined in the configuration file. If you define something else, then you're going to have to swap this port number out. And we're going to allow UDP over that because Wireguard is just encrypted UDP traffic. And once we have those two rules in, we can go ahead and enable the uncomplicated firewall, which will just give us a little bit more security on this machine. And because we still have the ability to communicate with the server, we can be confident that those worked and we are allowing traffic over 22. That's the critical one. If you missed that one, you're gonna have to pull down your VM and start again. Now that we have the firewall set up, we have the moment of truth, we can actually start Wireguard. Now Wireguard has this great command, wg-quick. And what this is going to do is that is going to give us the ability to pull up and tear down Wireguard based on that configuration file. So I'm going to say wg-quick up, and then you have to point it to the proper instance of Wireguard. We'll just give it wg0 and it will look for wg0.conf in the Wireguard folder. If you called your configuration file something else, you would replace that here. And there we go. So these are the individual commands that it's running. You could do these individually as well. Again, if you go to the Wireguard install tutorial on their site, they'll give you these individually if you want to understand them more. But basically, we're creating a Wireguard type interface at WG0, and we're setting up the configuration. There's the IP address, the local IP address that we established that this is going to run on. Again, this is one that we just made up that we want to choose for this, so it needs to be not being used on your network. And there's our IP tables. So the commands that we gave it We didn't get any errors, so we can assume that this is running, and there's actually a way to see that, which is WG show. So there's our interface public key and the port that we're listing on. So this is the information that your client will need, aside from the IP address, to connect to Wireguard. And speaking of the client, the server is working correctly. Now we need to set up our client. Now we will have to add the client as a trusted peer later, but we need to know some information about the client before we do that. I'm actually going to switch over to Windows to set up the client. We're going to do the client under Windows. Setting up a client in Linux is very much the same process. You don't have to do some of the other stuff like the IP table stuff, but you will just set up a configuration file and run it the same as you did this. So we'll switch to Windows and look at it from that perspective. We still will use the same configuration file and stuff like that. You just have to use an app that you get from Wireguard in order to set all that up. To get our Windows installer, we'll just head over to wireguard.com/install, and you can see that it has clients for a variety of operating systems. You can run this on your phone if you want. We're going to go with Windows, so we will just download this Windows 64 version and get that installed. In Wireguard, you want to create a new tunnel with the add tunnel control down here. It's a little bit annoying because OBS doesn't capture the pop-ups very well in window mode. So you want to add a new tunnel. Don't import from file, but add a blank tunnel. And I'm just going to show you, this one's already been set up because it didn't record the first time. So name it whatever you want. And I'm going to call mine Linode because, you know, we love Linode. And we're going to give them maximum value. They didn't pay us for this, but they have advertised with us in the past. The public key is going to be generated for you, as will the private key, so that you will only get these two lines once you start. Now the address we're going to put in here is going to be a local, from the local address pool, just an unused IP. I use 69 for my server, so I'm going to use 96 for my client. And again, this is IPv4. If you want, you can do IPv6 as well as IPv4 here. Just comma separate your addresses in here. And then you want to set a DNS server. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh wait, this is a video that's about privacy and you're going to use that DNS. Yeah, it's easy to remember. Don't use Google if you value your privacy. And then you want to put in a peer section. And the peer section is going to be the public key. Now this public key, you know, it's not this public key. This is from your server. So when you generated the keys for your server, go back to there, look at your public key file. That's the value that you want to put here. When it comes to allowed IP addresses, all the zeros, when you set it up for all the zeros, you're saying move all the traffic across this. If you don't have that, you'll notice that your little option down here will go away. When you have this valid value in here, you get the kill switch. Now what this is going to do is this going to let it set, so Wireguard could fail in a variety of ways. Let's say that, you know, Linode gets hit by a comet, the data warehouse, and your Wireguard goes away. What could happen is that you could be doing something that you want to be private, and suddenly Linode goes away and you lose that connection. So now that you're just, you know, you're going along and you're looking at stuff on the internet and you're using your real IP address all of a sudden. To prevent that from happening, make this checkbox, and this is a kill switch. So if the Wireguard goes away, everything goes away. You lose your internet connection and you know to do something about it or curb your behavior until it can be rectified. And finally, the endpoint value. This is the public IP address of our server. So the VM that you just created, this is its public IP address, and this is the port that you set up in your configuration on the server. This is the standard port that you want to use if you're just using the standard Wireguard stuff. And this is going to say, so right now, when we use this computer, our external IP address is whatever we're getting, you know, from the router. But once we set this up, our external IP address will be through Wireguard from that VPN, and this is what we will look like to the internet. Once you have this set up, you can save it, but you cannot connect to it yet. You will come out and you will get this screen, this activate. So you see you can have multiple interfaces set up here, but you cannot yet activate because right now our server doesn't know anything about this peer. So we have to give the server the information about this peer, most importantly, the keys, so that the encryption can be done. With our Windows client configured, we need to go back to the server, and the Wireguard needs to be running. So if you have taken it down since you went to set up your client, be sure to bring Wireguard back up with WG Quick. And once it's running, you can use WG Show to show you the status of it. I'm not going to do that because it'll expose my IP address. But once you are sure that it's running with WG Show, then you can set a peer. So here we see WG set, WG 0. Remember that if you used a different Wireguard interface name, substitute that, and then peer. Now this is the public key of my Windows Wireguard, my client. It'll be the same if you used a Linux client. So we can take a look at that here. You see there's the public key that matches the value that we're putting in here. And then we're going to set allowed IPs, and this is going to be the IP address that we created in the local subnet for our Wireguard client. And once again, we'll take a look here. You can see there, you don't need the /24, you just need the raw IP address here. And run that. And when you run that, it will generate a configuration file automatically because we have the auto config when this connection takes place. And the Windows client will actually randomize its port and it will update automatically. Now, because we're using this as a VPN, we want everything to come through this tunnel. As we have it right now, you could connect with your client and you could you could SSH in to so you could use the IP address that you set for your server, in this case 69, and you could go to that, which will be a local address on your client computer, and you will actually go through the tunnel and get to the Linode server. So you will have, that tunnel to the Linode server. We want all of our traffic to go through this. And one thing that could just drive you out of your mind if you follow some of the tutorials is that IPv4 and IPv6 forwarding is very often disabled by default. So we need to go to etc sysctl.conf, and we need to look for this line, net IPv4 IP forward equals 1. If you're using IPv6, this one will also need to be uncommented. You need to uncomment those, and you need to reboot. Very important, because otherwise you will have no idea why your internet is failing, and it would simply be because there's no forwarding going on here. Another thing to look out for is, when you spool up one of these VPN or VMs, it's probably a good idea to just go ahead and apt upgrade and apt update everything, just to make sure that, everything's good to go before you get started. Because I've also experienced some weirdness, and then you want to reboot the machine after that as well. So I would do that, set everything up, set those forwards, and then reboot everything before the final step of connecting with the client. Now with all of that done, our server freshly rebooted, we head back to our client and we just need to click that activate button. You will get a notification in the bottom right from Windows saying Wireguard has been activated. You'll see some activity start down here at the bottom in the transfer section. And if we head over to a web browser, we can head to a site that's going to show us our external IP address. And there we are, our Linode IP address from our Windows client, Atlanta, United States. That's what we chose when we set up our Linode server for where physically our server was located. Do a DNS leak test, and they're all coming from Atlanta, all coming from Google. So we're all good. We now have all of our traffic going through our VPN on Linode. Because the VPN server is not something we want to have to log into ever again, other than to do updates, we probably want this to start when the system starts. So if there's any unexpected reboot or something like that, Wireguard is just automatically going to start. So systemctl enable, and then we pass it the old wg-quick at wg0. Again, replace wg0 with your interface name if you chose something else when you created your Wireguard config. And we will create that. Next time the system reboots, Wireguard will come up at the same time as the system boots.
Now we only did a single client here, and I only did a Windows client. Of course, the Linux client setup is pretty much the same way. You just create your configuration file. Now you might be thinking, hey, I watched the level 1 text channel. I'm not a normie. I've got like 6 computers in my house. Am I gonna have to set this up on all of them? Well, if you're an advanced power user, you can set this up at the router level, and you can put your whole network on it. Or you can have different virtual networks so that you can have some devices on the Wireguard and some off it and stuff like that. And we are actually probably gonna have some more content related to that kind of stuff in the future. But the good news is, your Wireguard server doesn't have to be changed. The Wireguard server you set up from this video can be used again when you get to the whole network router setup. So there it is. It's pretty basic to set up. You should keep it updated. Like all things, you should keep your cloud VM updated. So, you do have to interact with it from time to time. But for the most part, just remember to keep the good traffic on the VPN and keep the dangerous traffic, or maybe vice versa, but just make sure that you don't out your VPN with your real identity. And it will serve you well. You can do things that might be a little embarrassing. We've all got things we do on the internet that we don't want other people to know about, right? There's nothing wrong with that. So just use a VPN and do it yourself.